What is going on, ladies and gents? Welcome to Collectors Gone Digital. My name is Josh, and on today's episode, we are going to be recapping the MetaMagic space with David Yu. Now, in our last episode, we announced membership tiers, and we are going to be running our first event this Friday at 9 p.m. EST. It's going to be our first watch party. If you guys are interested in participating, make sure to grab your ticket by joining as a member down below. We're going to be talking about several points from David's recent award to how he started his first Vagabond Games retail shop. So with that being said, let's kick the video off with the first point. So this past week, it was announced that David won a very prestigious EY award. Now on the call, David actually mentions that he was nominated as a finalist for this exact award back in 2002 or 2004, and this was for Vagabond Games, his first retail shop. So that was roughly 20 years ago, and he says that ever since then, he's really wanted to win it. Leading up to his name actually getting announced, he didn't think he actually won it. So there were a number of things that actually happened that made him think this. The first was that he actually asked somebody if he needed a speech, and the person responded that only the winner needs one. So that was the first indication. The second one was that he was sitting at a table in the very back of the room. It wasn't even close to the stage. And apparently there were people who were nominated in the exact same category sitting right in front. And then he says the last thing that made him think this was just the caliber of competition. So the overall event, as you guys can see on the right hand side there, it looks packed. He says that New Zealand's most successful entrepreneurs filled the room alongside highly acclaimed lawyers, accountants, and other executives. Now, as a result of winning the award, he's now been invited to Monaco. So if you guys don't know, Monaco is probably the bougiest place on the planet, but this is going to be taking place in 2024, and this is where David is going to be competing against the winners from roughly 60 countries around the world. So moving on, they talk a little bit about advertising and what VeVe and Nakomi has kind of done in that department up until this point. David says they don't pay a lot in ads, which we know about, and aside from the social channels that they use to announce their drops, they don't really have any additional means of content distribution. So he actually says that when him and Dan go to a lot of these events, many of the industry insiders don't actually know who they are. And big companies have actually approached them like Forbes, but David and Dan have actually turned them down. So this is where David acknowledges that, you know, they could have built things faster. And right after he says this, he says that, you know, if you kind of go all out, then in theory, you can kind of build something bigger and faster if you go all out. I think if you were to kind of, you know, rewind back to 2020 and you look at companies like Crypto.com, for example, who are just dumping a ton of money into advertising, a lot of that money kind of goes out the window when you see where the overall market and sentiment kind of went. But I think that if a company dumps too much money into advertising too quickly at the wrong times, that could be detrimental to the life of the company. But he says that VeVe's always taken the opposite approach, and David and Dan and everyone on the team have always kept their heads down, and that the work will be recognized one day. So speaking of that, the recent award that David just got opens up many more doors and opportunities for him as a businessman. So we've heard about times in the past where a large deal will get announced, like Disney, for example, and right after that happened, David had mentioned how the phone on his desk just would not stop ringing. This would probably be a similar situation. So moving on, David talks a little bit about achieving goals, and he says that he's always dreamt very, very big. I don't think that's going to shock anybody. On top of that, though, he says he also dreams about a lot of smaller things, giving examples like going to Comic-Con over in Singapore. I think it was Singapore, he said, someplace. And his point is to take the little bites. So it's not about having one big dream, because if you're only focused on one larger thing, then, you know, you might get to that point, like owning a home, for example, and you might get denied for the mortgage. And then all of a sudden your whole world comes crashing down, right? So he says collect all the small goals, work towards the larger ones, and even if you can't achieve the larger ones, the smaller ones still help with, you know, overall fulfillment. So moving on, he talks a little bit about his role in the company. And he says that he's gotten much better at separating emotion from logic when making decisions. This entire section is pretty much spot on with what we talked about before. He says that, you know, he used to be a guy wearing 20 different hats. You know, this would have been at the beginning of the company when he had to micromanage and kind of handle all the roles in the business. We know that as a business grows, you delegate those roles to other people, And now he's at the point where it's impossible for him to know everything that's happening inside the business. So there was actually a point in an interview a couple weeks ago where he was asked a question that he couldn't answer, and apparently he got a lot of backlash from that. I didn't even know about that. But he says he's had to learn how to let go of control, to trust people, and how to appreciate the team. It reminds me of the one classmate doing the group project back at school that just wanted to do everything and wouldn't let anybody do any of the work. That's David. But of course, the business has grown too big for him to handle by himself or just the initial team that started it all. So as tasks grow, team grows, it's just impossible for him to keep track of every single thing. So David gives us a little story about how he started his first retail shop. So he said he started collecting and then moved into selling prepaid telephone cards. Now, with regards to his stamps, he realized at one point that he actually had too many duplicates. And so what he did was he took a small A5 size board, like a Bristol board, I guess, that he would use to display his stamps, and then he would consign them to gift shops along New Zealand's main tourist street, Queensway. So David would consign these stamps, and then every Friday night he would catch the bus to the city center with his backpack, and he would swap the stamps out while collecting the money from each shop. Now later on, he says that there was actually a craze that happened for the phone cards that he was selling, and up until this point he had actually collected a lot of them. So the money that he would make from selling these prepaid cards is actually how David got into the collectibles and gaming business. So he said that a comic and gaming distributor went bankrupt in his area, and he ended up buying a lot of their stuff at a liquidation sale. Now at this point he was only 17, so he was actually too young to open his shop. He couldn't sign a lease or anything like that. And so he made a deal with a computer shop on the North Shore where what he would do is he would take the front of the store while the owner would use the back as a repair shop for his computer stuff. So David said he was paying $585.25 per month for rent. He was selling Warhammer, comics, RPGs, every type of trading card game that you can think of, sports cards, the whole works. So his shop was located in the middle of a small village. He traded his way out, making a couple dollars at a time. In fact, he couldn't actually afford the entire sign for his shop name at the beginning. So Vagabond with the 8 letters, he said that he could only afford the first 4 for the first couple of years. So Vega, and then Bond ended up coming later. So the person that he had to pay to make that actual sign, they charged letter by letter, and he could only get halfway through the word. Next up, they talk a little bit about the process that David uses to negotiate with potential licensors. Metaverse Life actually asked the question, are you entering these meetings with models made as examples to show these potential licensors using their actual IP? To make a longer story short, the answer to that question was no. He does actually go off on a little bit of a tangent here, but it's more pitch them the potential of what VeVe can do for the brand. Now here's the tangent. He says that VeVe is very secretive. And if you don't need to know, you're not gonna know, referring to the people working inside the business. And the last but not least, David rounds things off by saying, and this is exciting, that he is currently working on a deal that, if successful, it's going to be groundbreaking for VeVe. When I think of a groundbreaking deal, I think of Disney. That magnitude of IP. So I don't know what he's talking about here, but obviously it's a good sign. So moving on, he's asked about the success with the Funko drop, and David actually mentions how he was recently in talks with the company. He says that when he met up with Mike, one of the executives from Funko, David showed him his original bobblehead Funko, which for those who don't know, that's how the company started. So David says he's been a big fan, he's always admired the company from day one. In fact, he's been selling Funko in his shop pretty much since the beginning. He says he's flown to different parts of the world throughout his career in numerous attempts to pitch and work with Funko. And it took multiple times for Funko to understand the potential of the digital side. So he says that it wasn't until COVID, when NFTs and things like that started to pop off, that Funko apparently acquired another project in the blockchain space on the Wax blockchain, and that's going to be the Funko Digital Pops. So we've covered those on the channel before. But all in all, the VeVe drop went beyond Funko's expectations. He said that he just sat down with them last week, I believe, and the companies discussed how they felt, as well as potential collabs that they could do with other IP in the future. That's what David said, other IP. So we know that Funko's network is massive. We also know that Funko's drops haven't been selling out as much lately. So David does make the reference here that the gold Funko sold for 150 US dollars. That's 10 times the average price of their Funkos. So considering that in the 3,000 that they sold, this would be the equivalent to them selling 30,000 Funko Pops at the $15 price point. So this is a fantastic sign, okay? Because it shows VeVe's ability to provide Funko with demand. And on top of that, actually, right, in one of the recent interviews that David did, he mentioned that the Addiction series was a test. So we wanted to see if VeVe can help a smaller, unestablished brand, you know, gain more exposure, which was a huge success. But this is the complete opposite of that. We're talking about a large, established brand, and VeVe still helped them. So that's nothing short of fantastic. David moves on to say some pretty bullish stuff here about Japan. So he mentions that he's going to be making a trip to Tokyo for back-to-back meetings with potential licensors. And he says that Japanese content is a must-have on VeVe. So we know that popular anime has been a big request from the community. We do have some anime on the platform, but not what people have been requesting in terms of, you know, Dragon Ball Z and that type of stuff. But David says he's going to do everything he possibly can. He's even going as far as learning Japanese the same way that he learned German, which I didn't even know he spoke German. But in his words, he says, I must have all the Japanese anime on VeVe. That's a must. And I'm going to leave it right at that. And last but not least, we're going to round the episode off with some answers that David gave to some multiple choice questions about some of his favorite movies and characters and IP and that type of stuff. The first one was between Back to the Future, Jurassic Park, and Indiana Jones. That's a really, really tough one. I look at all three of those and they're so unique for their own reason. I'd probably have to lean towards Back to the Future, but Indiana Jones is so close. But Back to the Future is going to be what David chose. Moving on. We're going to speed this up a little bit here. Hercules, Aladdin, or Lion King? Which one are you guys choosing? I would probably have to go Aladdin for me on this one. But David ended up choosing the Lion King. Next up, we got Ninja Turtles, Power Rangers, or X-Men. David answered this one real fast. I would have to go X-Men. That one's actually quite easy for me. But in terms of what David chose, he chose the Ninja Turtles. Next up, we got three great shows. These three bring me back. Oh my. Recess, Hey Arnold, or Fairly Odd Parents. This one's gonna have to be Recess for me. I would sit down every single day before school, and this would play at 8:30 in the morning, and I would watch this. I would watch an episode before I got on the bus. Fairly Odd Parents is close behind it though. In terms of what David chose, he had to go with Hey Arnold. Next up, we got the big trio, Xbox, PlayStation, or Nintendo. I'm an Xbox guy myself, never been a PlayStation guy. Nintendo, I'm a fan of, but I've always leaned towards Xbox. In David's case, though, he went with Nintendo. Second to last, we got Aliens vs. Terminator. This one's actually a really, really tough one as well. I'm leaning more towards Terminator. I don't know about you guys, but in terms of David's answer, he went with Aliens. And last but not least, this was a random one. Taylor Swift, Rihanna, or Beyonce. Now, there is a right answer here, okay? David gave the wrong one. I'm just saying. Now, he went with Taylor Swift, but the right answer is Rihanna. Riri all day. 25 hours a day, 8 days a week. Enough said. Moving on. Ladies and gents, that's going to conclude today's episode. I hope you enjoyed. That's going to be a summary of David's appearance on the MetaMagic X space that happened this past week. As mentioned at the beginning of the video, memberships are now live, so if you guys do want to join us over on Friday for our first watch party, we're going to be watching the newest Transformers, Rise of the Beasts. These events are going to happen on random occasions, random movies as well. It's just some fun stuff to do inside the Discord on top of all the other stuff we got. But if you guys enjoyed the content, make sure to like and subscribe. Comment down below what you want to see in a future episode. And as for next, I'll catch you then.